Assalomu alaykum, elchi janoblari.
Alaykum assalom.
Siz bilan Washingtonda suhbatlashib turganimizdan juda ham xursandman.
Menda.
Hali Toshkentda yana gaplashamiz. Faoliyatingizni endi boshlayapsiz. We know that you just got to Uzbekistan. But we are very much interested in your assessment of the current situation in Uzbekistan, because you have been watching Uzbekistan for a long time, and here at the State Department for many years you focused on Central Asia, and you also served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, specifically focusing on the region. So we know that you know a lot of things. So thank you so much for agreeing for this conversation.
It's my pleasure.
This week you had a strategic partnership dialogue here, and then we have an energy crisis in Uzbekistan as we speak. We have Karakalpakstan trials going on in Bukhara, and there are other pressing issues that I would like to talk with you about
I look forward
today.
to it.
So let's talk about what happened this week here. We had a large delegation, a rather significant delegation from Tashkent. What are your takeaways from this dialogue? We know that these are annual meetings. What's new about them this year?
No, it's a terrific question. We did have a terrific delegation led by Foreign Minister Norov, but it included the Justice Minister and many others as well, many other people who've worked for many years on U.S.-Uzbek relations. I've participated in a number of these dialogues, but qualitatively, this dialogue felt different to me. It was really, first of all, we covered a huge range of issues. In addition to bilateral relations, we talked about security, we talked about regional issues, we had a human dimension dialogue, economic issues, but really the tone of the conversations was really much more candid and open than in many of the dialogues that I've participated in the past. And so I think it's an indication that our relations, continue to get stronger and stronger.
Yet it is quite exclusive, because when you used to have annual bilateral consultations, we used to see non-governmental organizations also coming in, their representative participating in these discussions. But now with these enhanced talks, it's really government to government, right?
No, the annual bilateral consultations never formally included non-governmental organizations, although we have often used the occasions of the ABCs or the SPDs to be able to have those types of dialogues on the margins. But unfortunately, you're right. This week, we did have a number of other conversations. I know that the delegation had a number of meetings on the Hill. I know they visited the Bush School, for example, and so we definitely encourage them to engage directly with civil society as well.
But when these full-day conversations were just government to government?
The nature of these discussions has always been and continues to be government-to-government talks.
So based on them, what would you say are the top mutual priorities at this point?
It's hard to boil it down. I will say that one of the techniques that we used during these talks was to say, hey, let's come up with a short list of priorities that we can exchange for the coming year. But it's very hard to keep it to a short list.
It ends up being longer.
It gets long and longer. Certainly, the nature of our relationship hasn't changed. As you know, we've always supported Uzbekistan's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. But I think as we see the relationship deepening, there are opportunities to go deeper. And one of the things that I told President Mirziyoyev, and that I firmly believe, is that we really need to work more to expand our commercial and trade relationship and to help Uzbekistan develop economically. Because I think an economically prosperous Uzbekistan is a more independent Uzbekistan. And that really will, I think, in the long run, help U.S. interests as well.
And that is more relevant than ever now. You have your own priorities, obviously in line with these priorities that we've been, talking about as the U.S. ambassador in Tashkent. What will be some of the, biggest spheres or most important spheres for you as you start your assignment there?
Yeah, I think the three big areas, as I mentioned, were certainly economic, commercial relationship. Of course, we want to continue to support President Mirziyoyev's reform agenda, and so certainly in a broad area of political reforms, I think we have a lot of work to do. And then finally, I think also on the security relationship, there's room for enhanced military-to-military and partnership and a deeper security relationship as well, as we work together to combat issues like terrorism and narcotics trade, and to work to enhance Uzbekistan's border security.
So to clarify, then, human rights issues, civil society issues will be under the reform
Yes.
priority, and then Afghanistan will be under security, right? Is that how?
If you choose
see
to
it?
do it, but you're right. Certainly, Afghanistan was a major topic of discussion this week here in Washington.
So you somehow escaped the height of the energy crisis in Tashkent. This year, quite unusually, the capital has also been facing energy shortages. Are you following this issue? And I remember 2 years ago when I interviewed you, when you were the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, this was the November of 2020, Uzbekistan was in an energy crisis then. And when I was talking to you, we were getting questions from our fans saying, does America care about this? Do they care about these domestic problems? And of course, the underlying question there, and today as well, is, can you help? Are you willing to help Uzbekistan to resolve this energy problem?
We definitely care about Uzbekistan's problems, and even while I was in Tashkent last week, already we saw some outages and some rolling blackouts, and definitely we know that many of the houses, even in the Tashkent area, were cold, long lines at the gas stations.
Was the embassy affected at all with this?
Certainly, some of I think all of the neighborhoods in Tashkent experienced a reduction of the supply of gas, but I'm sure that our colleagues were fine, but we are very concerned about the people who really were adversely affected by this. Can the United States help? I think we can. We probably can't help in the immediate short term. We don't have the ability to increase the gas supply to Uzbekistan, but in the long term, I think some of the areas where we're partnering in terms of economic reform, in terms of things like privatization, in terms of strengthening the regional cooperation, these are all things which I think will enhance the resilience of the gas market, of the energy market in the region, that will make the companies that provide gas, I think, more effective as we look at privatization going forward, give them, I think, the resources they're going to need to be able to invest in the energy infrastructure to avoid outages like this in the future. But unfortunately, in the short term, I wish there was more we could do.
Are there any U.S. companies working in this sector or interested in this sector already starting their efforts that's been part of these discussions, bilateral discussions?
So I don't know of any U.S. companies that are directly involved right now in the domestic kind of gas or energy sector within Uzbekistan. But
how about the alternative energy sector?
Alternative energy, I believe there are U.S. companies that have, I think, really terrific technologies to offer. And I think that's an area where there's a lot of potential for U.S. and Uzbekistan partnership and perhaps investment going forward. As you know, the President Mirziyoyev and his government are making a very heavy investment in renewable energies. That's something that certainly is supported by our government here. As Special Envoy Kerry has been traveling around the world and working on the climate change and working on renewable energy. So I think that's certainly an area where I'd like to see stronger partnership.
So you would be vouching for this sector. You would be working with these companies
Absolutely.
if they are interested, or help them to resolve issues if they're already working with the Uzbek government.
Exactly.
Very interesting to hear you say that you really want to focus on the economic development in Uzbekistan, because so far the investment flow has been slow, and there are many reasons for that. And Uzbeks admit that there are issues, especially when it comes to the rule of law and transparency. But at the same time, I've heard many say, including the members of the business, private sector in Uzbekistan, that it's easier to work with other countries than the United States because they come with just very high standards. It's hard to find that common ground with them. So it's easier to work, for example, with the Chinese or with the Persian Gulf companies and with Russians because we kind of know their mentality. What do you usually say to that?
So I can't deny that there are other countries that have some comparative advantages. Geographic proximity is one of those advantages. Linguistic, I think, connections are another advantage that companies, some companies have. But I would say that there are a number of things which make U.S. companies really stand out as a real value proposition for a country like Uzbekistan, and that is the quality of U.S. investment. For U.S. companies, it's not simply transactional, and you can't measure, I think, their contributions in terms of just the dollar value of the investment. Because when U.S. companies invest in abroad, it's for the long term. The U.S. companies build capacity, they invest in local communities. Look, for example, at the partnership between Uzauto and General Motors. I mean, it's a tremendous partnership.
Long term.
Yeah, and that investment has created thousands and thousands of jobs, not only in Uzauto, but in the side industries and other places. And Uzbekistan now is a premier exporter of GM automobiles, and so I'd like to see more of that type of investment in Uzbekistan. U.S. companies that are there for the long run, that are working with educational institutions to train the next generation to work in their industry, that are investing in the local community and teaching. I think building Uzbek leaders who are going to be not only leaders of industry in Uzbekistan, but leaders of industry in the region and the world.
On anti-corruption efforts, we know that you've been working with the Uzbek government, specifically with the anti-corruption agency, on these efforts. How concerned are you with the corruption level in Uzbekistan now? And we know that that's the biggest factor behind the slowness of the investment flow.
So corruption is a major issue. It's not the only issue.
And it's an old issue.
It's an old issue, and it's a problem we face all around the world, even here in the United States. It's something that we continue to work on. I would say that we're getting good cooperation. As you know, there was a delegation that came here to the United States
to participate
recently
at the global forum.
Exactly, and we're working very closely with the Ministry of Justice, with the Prosecutor General, with the courts. Combating corruption is not a simple or short-term problem. It's something that's going to take years and years of effort, and it requires changing people's mentality and people's culture. And so we recognize that this isn't a problem we're going to solve quickly, but we appreciate that the leadership that President Mirziyoyev has shown on this and the cooperation that we're getting from his government. But we still have a lot of work to do.
And it is such a deeply rooted issue that it is at the core of many, many other issues and ongoing problems in Uzbekistan. For example, even though the main reason for the July unrest in Nukus, Karakalpakstan was the constitutional reform proposal that angered many people, protesters were also expressing grievances about the level of corruption in Karakalpakstan and the level of corruption in the capital itself, saying that nobody cares about us. What's happening to all this money that's being directed to us? We're not seeing the impact of this investment. How do you see evaluate the aftermath of what happened in Karakalpakstan so far? We know that you're closely watching the trials in Bukhara, and you have called for a full and transparent investigation. How do you see the process so far?
So, as you said, we're following it very, very closely. After the initial protests and the horrible violence that we saw in Karakalpakstan, there were some encouraging steps taken by the government to establish an independent commission to take a closer look at what actually happened. We'd love to see the report and the findings of this commission. I think it's long overdue, and I'm sure that in addition to the United States, I'm sure the people of Uzbekistan would like to know what the commission found. At the same time, we've seen a number of people on trial, but there's still some questions about whether or not there will be law enforcement officials that are going to be held accountable for possible crimes or misuse of force during the protests. So these are all things which we're waiting. Justice moves slowly sometimes, and we recognize that. It's important that these proper procedures are followed, but we do hope that there will be some more information shared and some more transparency and ultimately accountability for what happened in Karakalpakstan.
Have you seen what the Chief Prosecutor's Office issued this week about the numbers, the statistics?
I have not seen.
So they're saying that, well, based on the numbers that they're showing, we can see that there are 59 people behind bars. That includes 20 people among the 22 who are now on trial in Bukhara. And two people there, one is under house arrest apparently, another one is conditionally released. And then there are 39 people who are being investigated separately.
Okay.
So the majority of the 516 who were initially arrested, they were, they let them go, and then the chief prosecutor's office also, in response to the inquiry from the ombudsman's office, they said that the security forces, the actions of the security forces, will be investigated, and if there is, enough proof, they would be prosecuted. So the government is basically indicating that everything is still on, the investigation is still on. So Justice Minister Akbar Tashkulov this week in Washington, he basically told us, don't rush to judge. Like, don't rush your conclusions because we're still working. Let the system work. Give us a chance. And give us a chance is a statement that we hear from the Uzbek government, including from the members of the Parliamentary Commission who are investigating, you just talked about. They say that something like this had never happened in Uzbekistan. We've never had such a probe. And this is in response to all this criticism about the commission. It doesn't really enjoy much credibility, including in Karakalpakstan, where I asked many people. They don't really see this as a serious effort, even though the commission keeps on emphasizing its role and functions.
Well, because they haven't released their findings yet. I think until we see, until there's a little bit more transparency about this investigation and the findings of the commission, how can people have confidence in it? But the news you're reporting that this week is certainly encouraging. That the indications that there should be more information forthcoming, and that the people who are on trial right now may not be the only ones who are brought to account, is certainly a positive indication. And so I look forward to, as I'm sure many Uzbeks do, I look forward to hearing more.
What was the gist of what the Uzbek government told you this week? Because you raised this issue with them during your talks. What did they tell you?
They told us much of the same of what I think you've probably heard from the Justice Minister, that both the trial and the investigation is still ongoing. And that if in fact there is evidence to support that there was misuse of that violence was committed, or that whether it was protesters or law enforcement who were guilty, that these people will be brought to account.
Are you still pushing for independent investigation? Do you think that these events should be investigated, let's say, by maybe outside groups, someone who's more impartial?
So in the end, I think I'd like to see what the commission comes up with. It'd be premature of me at this point to say that the results of their finding are insufficient when we don't know yet what they found. But certainly, as a general principle, I think it's fair to say that there should be as much transparency as possible about events like this, and that that whether it's journalists or whether it's civil society or human rights advocates or others, they should all be, I think, free to look into what happened and to make sure that this type of thing never happens again.
You have been in Uzbekistan now for a few weeks. Knowing everything that you knew about Uzbekistan before you got there, have there been any things that you found surprising, uplifting, promising so far, including in the system?
Yeah. So in addition to the physical changes, and there have been many, because as you know, I last lived in Uzbekistan some 26, 27 years ago, and certainly Tashkent has changed dramatically in that time. But I'd say more significant than the physical changes has been, there's a real change in the mentality of the people in Uzbekistan. When I was there, over a quarter century ago, there were, people didn't know what to make of foreigners, and I think they kept, foreigners a little bit. Well, of course, Uzbek hospitality has remained unchanged, but still, they were a little bit, cautious with foreigners. And now it's really refreshing to see, I can go into supermarket, and people might overhear me speaking English to my wife, and people see that as an invitation to come and talk to us and to learn more about us, and that's a refreshing change. And so I think Uzbekistan is, or as the president would say, young Uzbekistan is opening up to the world in a way that wasn't true when I lived there before.
It's impossible to talk with the Uzbek officials, with Uzbek policymakers, including those around President Mirziyoyev, without them telling us, mentioning the Russian pressure, the Chinese pressure, and both of them, they say, have increased because of the war in Ukraine, because of the challenges of the times, and they definitely don't want to be choosing sides. And many experts here in Washington also recommend, they urge the U.S. government not to force these Central Asian countries, including Uzbekistan, to choose sides that, Tashkent maneuvers and makes decisions based on the moods in Beijing, and especially in Russia. How do you see the picture? Is this really real, these increasing pressures? Do you feel it?
So I can't speak for the government of Uzbekistan.
Definitely, but
people,
as an American.
But what I can say is that we are 100% sincere when we say that Uzbekistan should not be forced to choose what kind of relationship they have with their neighbors or with other countries. I frankly have long been an admirer of the governments in the region, in terms of their ability to say that, hey, no, we need to have a balanced or multi-vector foreign policy if we're truly going to remain independent. And so the United States policy is simply to support that, and we believe that we can be a strong partner for Uzbekistan, as we talked about, in the economic space and the security space, but we don't think that partnership should necessarily come at the expense of Uzbekistan having good and positive relations with its neighbors and with other countries as well.
So if the members of the Uzbek government tell you, and we know that they've already been telling you, don't push us too hard, especially when it comes to human rights issues, on non-governmental organizations, on freedom-related issues, including corruption. We're doing our best. This is the best we can do right now. And we are the reform-minded people in the government. We're working very hard. Support us, cheer for us, help us in any way you can. What do you usually tell them?
So the United States, as a matter of fact, always puts its values at the center of its foreign policy. And we will never kind of ignore our concerns on human rights, on democracy, on
media freedom,
on these principles. They will always be a part of our foreign policy. At the same time, we recognize that every country has its own democratic path to follow. And Uzbekistan is no different. And so while we'll raise these concerns, we understand that Uzbekistan has to move at its own pace. Many of the changes that we're seeing in Uzbekistan right now are really happening from the top down, and that makes it sometimes difficult to change things like attitude about, as we talked about corruption, about media freedom. And so I don't see I think that's a false choice. You don't have to choose between advancing democracy and human rights and having good relations in other spheres. I think we can, as we say in English, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I certainly think that we've seen that in Uzbekistan. We've seen tremendous progress in recent years in the areas of religious freedom, trafficking in persons, and the elimination of forced labor. And I'm confident that we're going to see continued progress in media freedom, in freedom of expression, in the protection of human rights, and also in the fight against corruption as well.
Do you observe generational change, especially change in the political mentality as we see these new appointees, specifically around President Mirziyoyev? His chief of staff is a different person now, and we know that you recently met with top 2 communications policy people in the government. How do you see their performance so far? Are they making a difference?
I think they are making a difference. I think Uzbekistan has been independent now for over 30 years. Which means that we've seen a whole generation of Uzbeks who grew up with no memory of the Soviet Union or the Cold War. And we've seen many of these people increasingly and more with each day have experience, traveling around the world, have experience, studying abroad, have experience, working in the private sector. And so I think they're bringing these experiences and these ideas back to Uzbekistan, and many of them want to work with the president to build this new Uzbekistan, to fulfill this vision he has for the future. It's going to take a lot of work. It's not going to be just a few officials, in certain positions. I think we're going to need to see changes, not just in for example, in the central government, but it's going to have to happen at the regional and the municipal level, and that's going to take time.
And that's what you mean when you say political reforms? In these talks too, you reminded the Uzbek government that you want to see more speedy reforms.
So we want to see Uzbekistan, continue to strengthen as a democracy, continue to, respect human rights. We don't have a particular vision for how Uzbekistan, should go about this. That's up to Uzbekistan and the Uzbek people to decide. Whether, like how Uzbekistan, changes its constitution, how Uzbekistan changes, municipal, governance, how Uzbekistan, combats corruption. That's for Uzbekistan to decide. We are standing by to help because we want to, provide assistance when requested in combating corruption, in promoting economic and political reform. But we are not telling Uzbekistan how to become a stronger democracy.
And as we wrap up this conversation, I have to ask you, you met President Mirziyoyev. At least you had a brief conversation. Had you met him before?
I have met him once before. As you indicated, when I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Central Asia, I had an opportunity to meet him on one of my trips to Tashkent. But it was an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to meet him again.
What did he say to you?
So he told me that he thought, because of my previous experience in Uzbekistan, that I was uniquely qualified to appreciate, how much the country has changed and how difficult the reform process, has been. And I think he's right. But we also talked about the importance, as I indicated, about deepening our political and our economic relationship. He asked for continued support for his reform agenda. We talked about Afghanistan, which I know is a serious concern for Uzbekistan, and it's a subject that we discussed here in Washington this week as well. So it was a short but very robust conversation which covered a number of topics.
Well, good luck. Good luck with your assignment in Uzbekistan.
Thank you. And I look forward to seeing you in Tashkent.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.